But I'm going to bring on our first guest, Zohran Mamdani, who is a New York State Assembly member for District 36. He is also a former co-founder of his college's Students for Justice in Palestine. He was born and raised in Kampala, Uganda, moving to New York City with his family at the age of 7. And prior to representing the 36th Assembly District and its neighborhoods of Astoria, Ditmars-Steinway, and Astoria Heights, he worked as a foreclosure prevention housing counselor. And he has also done detours in film, rap, and writing. So without any further ado, Zohran, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, of course. And I've been wanting to have you on for a while because of the activity and activism and organizing you've been doing around Palestine. I saw you a couple weeks ago on the ferry coming back from the Statue of Liberty for that great action where Jewish Voice for Peace organized a takeover of the pedestal of the Statue of Liberty. I also saw you get arrested protesting outside of Chuck Schumer's house with your co-arrestee, Roz Pichesky. That rhymes, I didn't even think of that. But you're also engaging in a hunger strike right now. So can you tell us about this hunger strike and who you're doing it with? I know you're doing it with Cynthia Nixon, of course, the activist, the actor of Sex and the City fame, and also the former gubernatorial candidate. So tell us what you're doing and why you're doing it.
Yeah, I'm on the second day. I'm finishing the second day now of a hunger strike where myself and a number of state representatives from across the country, including a representative from Delaware, Medina Wilson Anton, as well as representatives that will be joining us from Oklahoma, from Michigan, from Virginia, alongside leaders in the Muslim, Jewish, and allied communities across the country. Especially, Cynthia, who joined us to launch this press conference on Monday. This is a tactic that we have been forced to take because the urgency of this issue continues to escalate, and so our tactics must escalate as well. And there is a belief in DC and in the White House that this issue will simply go away. You often hear it when you read about voter disenchantment with Biden's policies. There's a response. Sources close to the president or in the Democratic Party will speak about how there is a sense that come November of next year, people will simply fall in line. And we know the fact that this reality of 14,850 Palestinians at least having been killed in 7 weeks is a reality that will not fade with any day or week or month. It is something that will stay with so many people across this country and across this world. And I think so often we think about devastation purely in terms of a death toll. But the truth of it is that if a Palestinian is lucky enough to survive the bombing, then they will face starvation. The United Nations has said from October 21st up until now, the food that Israel has allowed into Gaza only satisfies 7% of the minimum caloric intake required for Palestinians to survive. The Oxfam has said that Israel is using starvation as a weapon of war. And today the World Health Organization came out to say that if things continue as they are, more Palestinians will die from disease than will die from the bombing. So we are starving ourselves because it's our government's policies right now that are starving Palestinians. And so often we disconnect the dots in politics and we say, oh, it's the Israelis who are doing this. And we forget about the fact that our thumb is so firmly pressed on the scale as Americans and even as New Yorkers that it would not be a surprise if we found our fingerprints on the bodies of those thousands of dead Palestinians.
Here are just some photos, by the way, of the press conference where you announced it. So Biden, you are starving Gaza, permanent ceasefire now. And that's you standing in front of the White House. Here's another photo. We also have this very pretty nighttime vigil image. That's Cynthia Nixon speaking. And then we also have video of Cynthia Nixon explaining why she's doing that. So
we just had Thanksgiving. It's a big holiday. And then we have many more holidays coming in December. And so the week after Thanksgiving is a time for people to be distracted and unfocused. And there's been so much momentum building to stop the bombing, to stop the killing in Gaza. all across this country and in so many countries across the world. And we wanted to make sure that people didn't lose sight of it in this week of distraction. And we are hunger striking as a way of amplifying that, yes, that Palestinians are being bombed and killed, but they're also being starved, and so many of them are on the brink of starvation.
Here you are, Zohran, at the vigil last night in front of the White House.
It was his horrific questioning of the truth of the devastation of Palestinians that led the health ministry of Gaza to take the time that it could have spent on saving people's lives to compile a list of the thousands of Palestinians who have been killed, their names, their ages. So we read their names here in front of the White House to honor these Palestinians, to humanize them, and to make it clear that they are not just numbers. Tomorrow we'll read them again.
What was it like when you did that? How were people responding? And have you gotten any response from the White House yet?
Haven't gotten any response from the White House as yet. The response, however, from Americans who have just been walking by has been one of support, one of solidarity. And, it is one thing to understand this devastation intellectually, but when you read out the names of people who have been killed and you read out their ages and you spend minutes reading one last name and then you come to an end, you feel that devastation all the more deeply. And I think a number of people who were reading were moved to tears because they were reading the remnants of a once vibrant family. We know that Israel has wiped out entire Palestinian families from the population registry in Gaza. When you read the names, it feels as if that horror comes to life.
I was at just observing a CUNY protest at the CUNY Graduate Center, and they had people lying down on the ground, and they had, on them was printed information about them. And so they would read their names and how old they were and say something about them and what they enjoyed. And it was very we are not numbers an organization, and it really does bring it home. I think people who are allies or supportive, I think it's easy to become desensitized a little bit.
Yes.
So this stuff is so important.
When you go on hunger strike, you start to feel lightheaded, you start to feel tired, you start to feel a dull headache throughout the day and pangs of immense hunger. This is the reality for Palestinians. This is what they face. And unlike myself, where I know that this reality will end for me on Friday, and for the other hunger strikers, all of us who go to a warm home at the end of the day where we have spent 8 to 10 hours freezing in the cold outside of the White House, Palestinians cannot return to their homes. 45% of homes in Gaza have been destroyed. 45%. And if the rate continues at what it has been, we are looking at the destruction of every home in Gaza by Christmas Eve. So imagine if you were facing starvation. Imagine if you were feeling all that came with that reality, and then you had to sleep on a mattress in the rubble of your home. It is something that I hope no one ever has to experience, but it is something that speaks to the urgency of why we must speak up, why we must organize, why we must agitate, and why we must refuse any attempts at characterizing this as a complex issue when the question is, are you or are you not okay with more Palestinians being killed?
What made you interested in this issue? Because I know you've been interested in it for a while. As I said, you've co-founded the Students for Justice in Palestine at your college. So why this issue?
I was born in Uganda, raised there, and moved to South Africa when I was 5 years old. And I moved there right after the fall of apartheid. And what I remember about living in Cape Town was how normal it was to stand in solidarity with Palestinians, how it was simply a natural extension of ourselves. And I remember growing up and the quote from Nelson Mandela about how our freedom is incomplete without the freedom of the Palestinians is something that would ring in my head. And then I got to this country and I moved to New York at the age of 7. And I was quite taken aback of how any support for Palestinians seemed to be considered illegitimate expression, and how there was this glaring hypocrisy when it came to the practice of any of our politics and any of our principles, in that they would not be extended to Palestinians. And as I grew older, I became familiar with the term of PEP, Progressive Accept Palestine.
Yeah.
And I would see time after time progressive politicians that I admired draw the line when it came to the application of their vision to Palestinians. And they said, I believe in a universal, principles of freedom, of liberty, of safety, of whatever it may be, until you get to Palestine. And it was a contradiction that it was just so glaring. And there was an attempt to pretend as if it didn't even exist. And I think that that is something that motivated me. And in high school, I used to spend hours of my time going back and forth with a friend of mine about the question of Israel and Palestine. And I would think that every time I would research my reply and I would write it out and post it on his Facebook wall. And I would think that this time I'm going to convince him. And I'm sure he felt the same way when he would write back to me, just going circular. And at that time I was in high school, and this phrase was quite popular. It still is, but I remember hearing it much more then, which was, don't preach to the choir.
Mm-hmm.
The emphasis was that you should find the person who disagrees with you the most, spend your time with them. And it was at that time that I actually organized with a friend of mine. We organized about 20 other South Asian students, and we founded our school's first cricket team. And it was an act, though dissimilar in topic, which taught me the power of organizing the choir, as opposed to preaching to someone outside of it.
Right.
Because in one move, I could change the material reality of my life and the life of my school and institution, versus continuing to go back and forth with someone who was just as convinced as I was. They just happened to be viewing this from a completely different perspective.
Right.
And that is a lesson that I took with me to college when I co-founded my school's first Students for Justice in Palestine. And the experience of organizing around Palestine is an experience that shows you the contradictions in so much of what we are told. And what I mean by that is just this moment I'll always remember of, we had a president of our school who was widely liked and considered to be a really nice guy. And we ran an academic boycott campaign towards the end of my time at the college. And I heard that the president said that if this were to pass, then he would simply overrule it. And it was kind of this illumination of the fact that there are limitations even to democracy that we are told exists within our microcosm of a larger society. And I think that it was a very important point for me to learn about Palestine and the so-called rules that apply, and then how they seem to bend when it comes to these 7 million people.